Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and today we're going to do an episode ranking the top 5 acdc songs, or should I say just basically talking about our 5 favourite acdc songs. And I've got Reed Little in the hot seat. Welcome back, Reed. How are you?
I'm doing great, Peter. Glad to be here. AC/DC is not directly in my wheelhouse, but I do have a long history with them, and I definitely have 5 favorite songs. So looking forward to this chat.
Fantastic. Well, acdc are one of my favourite bands, and growing up in Australia in the 70s, it was like the soundtrack to my youth. They were Australia's band in the 70s, and I guess from 1979 onwards, they were the world's band. So anyway, let's get started. So Reed, hit me with your number 5 pick.
Okay. So I don't want to go super lengthy in background, but probably the first AC/DC I heard was actually For Those About to Rock. We salute you. The Bon Scott AC/DC, while I was aware of its existence, I didn't know anybody who listened to it. I didn't have any of those albums. Back in Black was the first really huge AC/DC album in America. It wasn't the first album that they had over here, but of course that one just exploded and carried their career with them really through the 80s. But I had a college roommate who had a copy of High Voltage on cassette. And the song that I loved most off of that, it's going to be my number 5, is TNT. TNT is just a great song for guys to go nuts to. It's got a lot of energy. But one thing I love about it is just how musically strange TNT is. If you think about that song, it is defined by its empty spaces as much as it is defined by its music, which is one reason why I think people that have tried to cover it do such a poor job of it, because the only thing you can do is fill in those spaces, and then it's no longer the same song, right? If you start off with the opening riff, da, space, da, da, space, da, 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 and there's so much space in that song, it's so weird. And yet that's what makes it so hooky. It's got a good earworm. It just gets in there with that riff, and everybody can chant to, 'cause I'm TNT. It's a great party rock song. It's a good time. And it was really the first song of AC/DC's that I fell in love with. But it's my number 5 today.
Yeah, I love that song. It's not in my 5. It would have been definitely an honourable mention. I would say it's got wonderful lyrics, Bond's scrappy vocal delivery. I love it. And AC/DC are very spatial. There's always space between their notes, and I think that makes them all the more effective as a rock band. And that's an indication through that song. No, that's a really good choice. Solid start. Well done. My number 5 is off what I believe is my favourite AC/DC album, Power Age, 1978. This is the last Vander and Young production, and my song is Riffraff. Riffraff is an opener. It's a stonker of a track that opens their concerts. You've got that Cliff Williams bass. You've got Phil Rudd being the metronome on drums. And you've just got some wonderful tension in the guitar work of Angus, supported by Malcolm, and, just Bon all over it. No, I think it's just a really, really great song. And I'll also put this up, if you want blood, listening to the live version of Riffraff, check out this album. It's just ace. So, I think that album, it's one of my favorites. It's got that warm, organic production. And then, they got into the Atlantic years and went the Mutt Lang, and the sound didn't quite sound the same. But that is probably the end of that era where they were a little bit raw, organic, and quite scrappy. And that's my number 5, Riffraff.
Very good. All right, moving on to number 4. So I'm actually going to advance the clock quite a bit. I don't know how acdc's career went down in Australia and the rest of the world, but in America, the 80s was a constant downward slope. Of course, they went huge with Back in Black. For Those About to Rock did less business. Flick of the Switch did less business. Fly on the Wall did less business. Blow Up Your Video, which is a terrible album. Just going to say that. I thought that was a terrible album.
It's got one good song, though, isn't it? Isn't that got Who Made Who on
Seeker? That? Is it actually? I thought that was just on the... Yeah. I think it's on the Who Made Who sound, or
you're right.
It's on the Maximum Overdrive soundtrack. Yeah. But that's a terrible album. But then they came out with, out of nowhere, the album The Razor's Edge. And instantly they were commercially successful again. In fact, I normally like to wear a concert shirt from the band we're talking about. The only AC/DC shirt I owned was a Razor's Edge shirt. And because it had these like artful slashes on it, it just fell apart over the years, right?
Yep.
But it was the first time I saw AC/DC in concert, and getting to see them live was a life-changing experience for a rock music fan. They are so good live. And I brought home as one of my favorite songs an album or a track off of the album The Razor's Edge, and that is Thunderstruck. The way it opens up with that lick from Angus that's just repeating in the it's so hooky right to begin with. I don't think Brian Johnson's a fantastic lyricist. Sometimes he's a downright terrible lyricist, unless he doesn't write the lyrics. Sorry, Brian, if you're not writing those terrible lyrics, but some of the albums that he's on just have awful lyrics. But Thunderstruck's got great lyrics. It's an incredibly catchy song. It's powerful. It went down a storm in concert, and I have loved it ever since. Plus, Angus never sounded like that again, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. That's a great choice. Great choice indeed. And that is actually my number 4 as well.
Oh,
so we've got a bit of synergy there. So that was in 1990. That was their big comeback off the Razor's Edge. Razor's Edge sold 5 million. I like the production on that song. The production was done by Bruce Fairbairn, and he did the Bon Jovi Slippery When Wet, Pump. But what I like about the song is the build-up. You've got the instrumentation, and then you've got the call and response between Brian and Angus and the guitars. So, and you put the speaker, the headphones on. It's just a real interesting listen just to see the slow build up and even the space between the instruments. But it's got a slow build up and a great payoff in the song. And I think that was a mighty fine comeback for AC/DC, Thunderstruck. And that's my number 4. So there you go. Razor's Edge. And you're right, Who Made Who was a soundtrack album, so apologies.
Although I do like that song. It would be actually in one of my honorable mentions. And speaking of soundtracks, so here's a question for you. What do you get if you combine TNT and Thunderstruck? To me, you get their song off of the last Action Hero soundtrack, Big Gun.
Interesting.
And that is my number 3 track. It's another one that opens up with a naked guitar riff, lots of space, good Brian Johnson vocal on it. It's just catchy as hell. Got great energy to it. I know it's a soundtrack song, so it's kind of a throwaway, but it's a fantastic song. It's one that I have that soundtrack album. I wish I had got it out, but it's down in my construction zone, so I can't get to it right now. It sits so well in on that soundtrack, and it's just every time you get to it, it's like meeting an old friend. It energizes me. It's fun. Not really sure what he's saying. Big Gun. Is he pro-gun? Is he anti-gun? It's a great song for an Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie, though.
Did you see the movie?
I actually like Last Action Hero.
Yes, it didn't do very well, did it? It was a big flopperoonie, but I think it holds up well. I think it was maybe a little bit too clever but that could be a whole different chat. But yeah, just interested because a lot of people I know bought the soundtrack, but movie, no, we didn't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good choice. Good choice. Good choice. My number 3 is off this little album, Highway to Hell. So you've got the Mutt Lange, and this was the album that actually started to break acdc. So you could tell that they were gaining a lot of momentum, a lot of radio airplay, probably off the title track, Highway to Hell. And the production on this was really good because it started, Mutt Lange was really sort of capitalizing on the space between the instrumentation. And the song that I chose for my number 3 is Touch Too Much. They've never done it live. However, Axl Rose, when he was called in off the bench, when Brian had that ear injury, requested Angus to put it into the song set, and that was the first time they ever put that in the AC/DC song list. What I like about it is Bon, his leering lyrics. He's basically just talking about his lover, and she's just too hot to handle. And I think Bon was a very underrated lyricist. He's not going to be in the Dylan-esque class of writing metaphors and similes and in that sort of, very wordy, intellectual, but he's a street poet, Reed. And a lot of his experiences were based on just what he saw on the road, roughing it out, his girlfriends, his lovers, just the various things. And I think he has a very good sense of humor. A lot of it's tongue in cheek, and he has a good sense of wordplay. And this song has a lot of Bond's classic wordplay, like a night of romance with a woman who had a body of Venus with arms. It's kind of funny. It's tongue in cheek, and I listen to this song and I have a bit of a smile on my face. And I think what makes it for me and why I love Bon in AC/DC is he's a big personality, and his personality comes out in the music. So you hear it and you just sort of get a semblance of what he was like. He was a larrikin, he was a rascal, and he was kind of charismatic. Not a classically good-looking guy in the pop group sense. But he just had so much charisma. And the live footage I've seen of him, he just owned the stage. And that's through this song. It's just Bon in spades. So I'm just getting off the soapbox on Bon, but that's my number 3. Touch Too Much. I really love that song a lot.
All right. Well, interestingly, so if we had done an album show, most of my favorite albums actually fall into the Brian Johnson years, primarily because that's what I'm familiar with. Again, the Bon Scott albums did not gain popularity in the US until later, right? It was retroactive. People got into Back in Black first and then went back to explore the rest of the catalog. And of course, there's all of that weirdness between they release an album, which is half of this album and half of that album. And, they released Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, I think actually after Back in Black, right? Don't quote me on that. I'm not an AC/DC.
You are right. There was a lot of reissues to capitalize on the success of Back in Black, and all of those early Bon albums started to go platinum, and people were, exploring.
So it was much later in life when I started listening to Bon Scott, but Highway to Hell would have taken pole position as my favorite AC/DC album. And I'm picking the title track as my number 2 selection. I think Highway to Hell it's got everything that I want from an AC/DC track. It's got great guitars. It's got great lyrics. It's like you say, it's slice of life lyrics. It reminds me almost of like Phil Mogg from UFO, except done with a sense of humor. Mogg can be so serious about himself, right? Whereas Bon sounds like he was having fun. But even then, having fun came at a cost. And he knew what the cost was and was willing to pay it, right? And he put that idea into so many songs. It's A Long Way to the Top, If You Want to Rock and Roll, and Highway to Hell, and others that are escaping me at the moment. But that song has everything. It's got a great riff. And when I think of my favorite AC/DC songs, they all have great introductions. That song, Highway to Hell's got a great introduction, but it's got a great through line and the sing-along chorus. And if the songs that really, really are memorable to me have those great sing-along choruses. So that song is just nearly the perfect AC/DC song for me. But we'll get to what's perfect next.
Ooh. Yeah, I can't wait to hear that one. I'm going to AC/DC plug me in. This is, I don't know if this ever came out in America, but this is a compilation of all their live clips, whether it's in concert, wherever it's on TV shows, and there's some really, really great footage from Bon in those later years and singing, some of the songs that you've just mentioned. So I thought I'd just include this in our discussion, but just to our viewers, this is really worth getting. It's a couple of discs, and it's got all the AC/DC. See, all the songs. And it goes back to, some really early live Australian TV appearances, right to the Bond year, up to Brian, but some really fantastic Bond footage live, and really worth investigating. But that's a really good choice, Highway to Hell. My number 2 is off probably the biggest selling hard rock album of all time, and I think we all know that is. It's this little number, Back in Black, 1980. And Back in Black, what I guess the name or the title Back in Black, I always sort of referenced it to mean we're back on the saddle. We're sort of, we're back in dark. You know how they're kind of the dark lords of hard rock. Back in Black, I think the meaning for them was we've made it. Being in accountancy terms, we're back in the black. Success. The graph is going up. And I think before Bond died, I think he knew the band had actually made it. And it just
Pardon me, I'm so sorry about this.
And it sort of reaffirmed that the band had made it with this album. And the song that I'm going to pick is You Shook Me All Night Long.
Oh,
I love that song. I love the space. And I think Mutt Lange really, with the production, just made the space. He kind of emphasized it much more than the earlier years in regards to the Vander and Young. The Vander and Young production was very organic, but Mutt Lange really sort of emphasized the space. And, if he could ask the band to add that extra millisecond between chords or notes just to emphasize the space, I think he did it. And you could see that with Highway to Hell, and especially with Back in Black, that was like a prototype for his later efforts, which became such production phenomenons like your Def Leppard Hysteria, your Def Leppard Pyromania. And you could see that the seeds were being sown because there was a lot more emphasis on the gang backup vocals.
Right.
So as part of the track, Lang is very methodical in, every track has to be in the right place, the perfect production. And you can see, in respect of a lot of the AC/DC songs on Back in Black and Highway to Hell, there's a lot of emphasis on the backup singing, the gang vocals, which wasn't so much in the earlier material. But I like You Shook Me All Night Long. And Reed, there's a point of conjecture that on that album, Back in Black, the lyrics weren't actually all written by Brian. It was actually Bon wrote a lot of the lyrics. There's this little book here called Bon, The Lost Highway, Jessie Fink. It's a really good read. I don't know if it's in America or it's hit the Northern Hemisphere, but It covers the last couple of years of Bond's life and the last couple of tours. And Bond left a very interested sort of solo life in those later years. He wasn't really hanging out with the rest of the band. And there was actually conjecture because of his drug and alcohol abuse and the way he was carrying on that he was going to be pushed out of the band. So there was a little bit of paranoia. And he spent a lot of his time in the American, that last tour, with a kind of an entourage. I wouldn't call it like an entourage of how we would think about it in today's society, but a group of rogues and rascals where he just couch surf. And this guy, Jessie Fink, actually went to America and interviewed a lot of his girlfriends and lovers and friends that were in this sort of group associated with Bond, where they would, just hit the terps and drink and just all these different stories. Now, he had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend, her name was Holly. And really, in part of it, he said that this is a few clues that in You Shook Me All Night Long, that it was actually the lyrics of Bond, not Brian. And I'll just read you an extract. I had great memories of taking a trip with him to Miami Seaquarium. I had a horse called Double Time. He was very sweet and gentle with Double Time. Bond was quite fond of him and met him on at least 2 occasions when we went to the barn. And then the author goes, Double Time. Brian Johnson was working double time on his seduction line in You Shook Me All Night Long. And there's actually other clues in that song. American Thighs. They interview other contemporaries like Pete Wayne. They said, when I heard that song, that sounded like Bond's lyrics to a T. So, and interesting enough that Brian was the lyricist for acdc for a couple of albums, then he got dropped, didn't do any more lyrics. So I'm of the view, and if you read this book, and it's a really good read, that Bond was very much from the grave involved in Back in Black. Probably did a few, even, I don't know, there's some conjecture whether they did any demos of songs, but lyrically, I think there's a lot of Bond spirits in that album, and that's why I think that You Shook Me All Night Long sounds like a Bond lyric and a Bond song, and I love it, and it's my number 2.
And it's got that great sing-along chorus, right?
Yeah.
You don't really, you can sing along with Back in Black, but it's not really like an experience, but that Shook Me All Night Long, you can get a whole party singing to that, and everyone's having a good time. And I want to apologize to anybody watching this video. There's a cat circling around my feet, literally biting me to get attention, and I'm trying to concentrate as much as I can.
That's all right.
And
it's all
that's
good.
Super, it's not like I'm a professional at this, but I'm trying to keep it together. Okay, so my number 1 song, and even though it became my number 1 song listening to Brian Johnson do it live, I really, really love Bond's version on album. And I am looking to the right because this is where my notes are. So it's from the album Let There Be Rock, and the song is Whole Lotta Rosie. For me, Whole Lotta Rosie is the perfect acdc song. Again, it's got that space. So it's not constant noise. There's a lot of space in it. There's guitar, there's drums, there's vocal, and then they put it all together, and it builds like a freight train. And once he hits that lyric, it just goes and goes and goes. And again, he's talking about his lover, kind of a funny story. I'm sure there's a lot of information on the internet about the history of that song, but there's a line in there that he says she weighs 19 stone, which, if I remember correctly, a stone is 10 pounds. Is that correct?
Thereabouts, yeah.
So I'm in Texas. 190 pounds in Texas is not unusual by any stretch of the imagination for the ladies. So that kind of cracks me up that was his idea of like this giant woman was 190 pounds. But it's just such an awesome song. And then it gets quiet again. right? So it starts with space, builds up like a freight train, gets quiet, and then jumps back into it. So the dynamics in that song are just crazy. And it's such a feel-good song. It's like David Letterman, if you're familiar with the TV host and comedian David Letterman, he once described a song as being the song that makes you want to drink the bar dry and take home the waitress. And that is exactly what I think of when I listen to that song. It's just, I said, it's so energetic and so happy. I want honky tonk piano. I don't actually think there is any honky tonk piano in it, but it's not arena rock. It's barroom rock and roll. It needs to be sweaty. It needs to be in your face. And it's just a fantastic song.
And it features on this album in side 2, track 1. Absolutely killer. And when it goes dun na 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 na, and then the crowd go, yeah, it's just, that's a great choice. And again, very much on the tongue-in-cheek, humorous lyrics of Bon, larger than life. Yeah, that's a great track. Absolutely. Well, my number one is off this little album. Now, this is the Australian version of the album TNT. Had a different album cover in the Northern Hemisphere when they were reissuing it off the back of Back in Black. And my song, it's A Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll. That's like it's an Australian anthem. I think it was voted the top 10 Australian songs of all time. It's the lyrics, the musicology, it's just perfect, direct, on point. And it's Bon just, with a scrappy vocal, just talking about life on the road. It's street poetry, and it's got a bagpipe solo.
Right. Yes.
What more can you ask? But, with acdc, Reed, I think that there's a lot of bands that say, I was influenced by Zeppelin, Sabbath, Purple. I was influenced by Nirvana. I was influenced by that. But acdc, to my ears, are the most pure rock band because their lineage is to the classic rock and roll era. Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard. You ask Angus Young, were you influenced by Blackmore or Page? And he goes, no, Chuck Berry. So their influences, they're in a bubble. They were not really influenced that much by the 70s, the early 70s material. I think there was some awareness because Malcolm Young's brother, George, was in a band called the Easy Beats, which were a big beat group in the 60s in Australia, Australia's answer to the Beatles. And they had a sort of semi-hit over in the States with Friday on My Mind. But I think he would have been attuned to it, to the sounds. But definitely, I think their lineage, AC/DC, is pure to the early days of rock and roll. And that's what I find it very special. And to me, they're like a genre in themselves. There's like hard rock, heavy metal, AC/DC. And how many bands have they spawned and influenced, Reed?
Yeah,
massive amounts. Massive amounts.
Even my beloved Ronnie James Dio has a song on the album Master of the Moon, which is basically an AC/DC ripoff.
Yeah.
So there's a I'm so sorry. That is it. Sorry, people, I'm old. Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones even loves AC/DC. And he so rarely has anything good to say about any other band. That is a crusty old curmudgeon, but he loves AC/DC.
Yeah, well, he loves this little number. He plays this every night before they go onto the Stones Go Live, and he reckons it pumps him up. And Keith, you're right. It pumped me up. I think it's a great album. And just going back onto TNT, this album, the last track 5, side 2, School Days, Chuck Berry. So I won't show that, but lineage to the heritage of rock. Yeah, they're on point, they're pure, and that's acdc to me. Well, anyway, that was a fun chat. As I said, it's not the definitive top 5 acdc. It's probably impossible to rank, but at this point in time, they're my 5 favorite songs. It could change tomorrow.
Yeah, if you talk about an acdc barroom brawl, though, I'd put Whole Lotta Rosie up against any of their songs. It could fight for supremacy after it had a few loggers in it.
Absolutely. Well, you tell me what you guys think. Put your comments. Please subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. We've got a lot of content coming up, and keep listening and keep watching. See you later.